What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at Conference Championship weekend in the UFL. That's right, we have reached the postseason of the 2024 spring football season, and these are the top plays that you're going to want to use in your DraftKings lineups this weekend. We are going to talk through the options for the game between the Michigan Panthers and the Birmingham Stallions on Saturday. We're also going to talk through the options between the San Antonio Brahmas and the St. Louis Battlehawks on Sunday night. First things first, we're actually going to take a look at one of DraftKings' best new games is being offered called Pick Six to walk through some of the best options for the UFL this weekend. I'm excited to dive into Pick Six. Got MLB here, got some WNBA, NBA. Not seeing. I'm here to dive into the top plays for DFS this weekend. DFS only, because apparently that's all we have available to us here on DraftKings. Deon Cain is on the screen here. He's going to be my favorite play at receiver this week, and it's largely because he's one of our top underperforming wide receivers. So we like to look at the target and air yard opportunity for receivers over a trailing 3-week sample, and Deon Cain has led Birmingham in weighted opportunity over the last 3 weeks of play. He has 31% of team air yards and 20% of team targets. He does have a receiving touchdown in that sample. However, he has just 8 receptions for 65 yards versus the 246 air yards that he has received. He's significantly underperforming his opportunity by about 18 PPR fantasy points over the last 3 weeks. In a gotta have it game here with Adrian Martinez, I feel like Deon Cain is going to be able to put up a bigger number than we've seen over the last couple of weeks here in the UFL. So he's one of my favorite plays overall on the slate. We do like to talk about the biggest favorites on the board. Now, we only have 2 games left, so it's not like there's a ton to go over here. But Birmingham is favored by 5 points, hosting the Panthers on Saturday, and St. Louis is favored by 3 points, hosting the Brahmas on Sunday. So that means as far as running backs are concerned, we're looking at the duo of Ricky Person Jr., who is listed as the starter once again this week, and CJ Marable for the Birmingham Stallions. I prefer Person here. We've seen him get a ton of opportunities when he's been up. See 10-plus carries in each of the last 4 weeks he had that were victories for Birmingham and not the negative game script against the San Antonio Brahmas, with a decent amount of targets being accessible at least as a ceiling, going back to that win in Week 8 against the Houston Roughnecks. Marable getting featured last week. Over the 3 weeks before that he played with the inactive week in Week 8, he was not really being used significantly with Person in the lineup. So I feel like Skip Holtz is going to go back to his preferred game plan of prioritizing Ricky Person, and I think he will outtouch CJ Marable this week. So he's the running back I'm looking to prioritize here. Michigan, on the underdog side of this game, did make an interesting decision. Nate McCrary is actually listed as the starter this week, with Matthew Colburn listed as the RB2. I don't know if I fully trust that, but the biggest thing to know about Michigan, if we go back to really the majority of the season while Wes Hills was healthy for them, they did use a tandem. They basically split the work between those guys fairly evenly. We saw in the Hills era, if you will, that Colburn kind of topped out at 15 touches in this game against the Memphis Showboats in Week 5, a game where Wes Hills also had a healthy amount of touches and I believe had 3 rushing touchdowns. So splitting the carries right down the middle between Colburn and McCrary feels pretty likely, with Colburn getting slightly more work in passing down situations, which may still be attractive here in a likely expected trailing game script. But I don't think we can pencil Colburn in for this massive workload that he had in Week 8 against the Memphis Showboats. I do think Nate McCrary, if not starting, is at least going to do enough to be annoying, if you will, in fantasy, if you are a Matthew Colburn fan. At $6,000, if you're looking to be a little different, I do think McCrary isn't the worst play in the world here. Going to the other game at running back, pretty easy with St. Louis. We know that Jacob Sailors is going to be the guy here once again. Good for 10-plus carries in this game, and hopefully we'll have the targets that go alongside it. Went back to out-touching Wayne Gallman by a significant amount over the last couple of weeks, even though we only had 7.7 fantasy points last week in the same matchup against the Brahmas. Should still see the touches there here. The only thing to be concerned about is the Brahmas have been the best defense in the UFL to close the season. They actually allowed the fewest points per game to UFL opponents here. The San Antonio side, we should have some clarity on this within the next couple of hours. I'm recording this at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, June 7th. Morgan Ellison did start last week because each of Anthony McFarland and John Lovett were inactive, waiting a ruling on what's going to happen here with the other two running backs for the San Antonio Brahmas with this game here. I think it's likely at least one of these other guys is going to be active. So just stay tuned, if you will, to that and the announcement on who's going to be playing running back for the San Antonio Brahmas primarily on Sunday evening. Probably worth late swap opportunity at a minimum. If it is just John Lovett and not Anthony McFarland, I will love to play him, no pun intended here, because he had the highest weighted opportunity role at the position when McFarland was out. You see how he really flashed in week 6 and week 7 against the defenders and the Roughnecks when he was in that situation. McFarland, the most expensive of the bunch, saw him get a ton of work in week 9 against Birmingham, but that's because John Lovett was inactive in that game. So it's not clear McFarland would get bell cow work. He probably would just end up splitting once again, and you're rooting for that ceiling performance in the passing game like he had against the Arlington Renegades for him to reach value at this $8,200 price tag. So I guess that is a rundown of all the running backs. I do prefer Ricky Person here with Birmingham. Prefer the Birmingham side in general if you're building one lineup because they do have the highest implied team total on this slate at 24 points in their matchup with the Michigan Panthers here. Wide receivers. Mentioned Deion Kane being my favorite play as far as underperforming his opportunity. My favorite wide receivers overall this week. My favorite wide receiver overall this week is Jontre Kirkland. He's the number 1 receiver in my projections. He had the highest weighted opportunity at receiver in the UFL this season. I'm projecting him for right around 10 targets, 6 receptions, 70 yards, and a 50% chance at scoring a touchdown in this game. Despite the loss last week, got a ton of work in the passing game from each of Chase Garbers and Quentin Dormady, and I would expect them to go to their number 1 weapon early and often in a must-win spot here against the Battlehawks. At $9,500, I like getting Kirkland into my lineup this week, and probably you want to play him in a flex spot with that being the second game of the weekend. My second favorite receiver, I'm sticking with Siaosi Mariner. We've seen a tremendous target share in games that he has been healthy since week 5. So if you exclude the game that he was knocked out of in week 7 with a concussion, he has seen 6+ targets in his last 4 starts. He is targeted heavily on his Roots run. We do have Marcus Sims returning to the lineup this week, but that doesn't scare me off of Mariner because if we go back to week 5 and 6 against the Showboats and the Arlington Renegades, he was getting a ton of opportunities then, and he was sharing the field with Marcus Sims. We go back to weeks 5 and 6, where you see Mariner had 6 and 7 targets in each of those games against the Showboats and the Renegades. Mariner and Sims were the number 1 and number 2 receivers, respectively, in terms of routes run for the Panthers. And those also did happen to be starts with Danny Etling, I believe. So I think we're just going to see Michigan go back to the offense that was very good to them in the middle of the season here, with Sims and Mariner dominating the reps outside the numbers, Trey Quinn working slot routes, if you will, over the middle, and Danny Etling throwing to those 3 guys throughout his outing. And at $6,900, coming in cheaper than Marcus Sims here at an anticipated high floor target volume. Got to like what we get with Mariner at $6,900. Behind Mariner, Hakeem Butler is an underperforming wide receiver now. We haven't seen a touchdown from him in 4 straight games. The passing production in general for the Battlehawks took a big dip with Manny Wilkins under center. Manny Wilkins generated like 70% of his fantasy points running the football while he was commanding this offense. A.J. McCarron is going to drop back and pass far more often. I would hope that in a game where they're going to just pull out all the stops and actually throw the entire playbook at this vaunted Brahmas defense, that Hakeem Butler ends up being a weapon that is used heavily to overcome this defense and help the Battlehawks potentially reach the championship, because that's what they're trying to do. Butler will be the one to benefit, and we can capitalize on his high target and air yard role here, and the fact that he hasn't put up a double-digit fantasy point game in 3 weeks here. So also an underperforming wide receiver on this slate, and my number 3 receiver overall in my projections this week. Deion Kane, already talked about him at the top of the show, is next on my list, but another Stallion, and we've seen him score a couple weeks in a row now, Jace Sternberger at tight end. Stallions media keeps touting his importance to this offense, now with a score in 2 straight games. Feel like in a must-win spot, he is going to play virtually all the snaps at tight end, going to be just as involved as he has been all season long. Number 2 on this team in targets this season, number 1 in receiving yards and in receiving touchdowns. This is the go-to guy for Adrian Martinez when he, quote-unquote, needs to have it, and I think he will continue to be that here in this spot. So I'm really interested in Jace Sternberger. Sticking with the Stallions, who, I think are the best option to stack this week. Marlon Williams is the other receiver that's going to be playing a ton for Skip Holtz in the Stallions offense this week. Williams has the 3rd most opportunities at pass catcher in this offense over the last 3 weeks for Birmingham, with 15 targets and 100 air yards roughly in that sample behind Kane and Sternberger. And I would expect him to have a similar role here in the conference championship against the Michigan Panthers. My other favorite receiver play in general on this slate, underperforming his opportunities, Stephen Mitchell Jr. Stephen Mitchell Jr. actually leads the Battlehawks in air yards over the last 3 weeks with 215 air yards, a good for a 37% share of team air yards from each of Manny Wilkins and AJ McCarron. 11 targets in that sample, 5 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown, underperforming his opportunity by about 13 fantasy points and only $3,800 here. Mitchell is glued to the outside for the Battlehawks. So he's running a high number of snaps that are very, very attractive in fantasy football. He's going to have a low volume of opportunities. He may only get 3 to 4 targets in this game, but they're going to be on average about 15 to 20 yards downfield. And so he's only going to need a play or two to break the slate here at a $3,800 price tag. So I'm really curious where his ownership ends up on this slate. And I'm willing to take a flyer on him and differentiate against the field by using him as my Battlehawks player in a lineup if I do choose to play based off of everything that I'm talking about in this video. At defense, I am going to start by deploying, I think, the Brahmas. Brahmas were the most productive defense in real football terms this year in terms of limiting opponents scoring points. So I think that's a really great way to just kind of start on defense. I suspect that the Stallions will be, like they are every week, the most popular defense that people deploy on DraftKings for classic slate fantasy football here. But the Brahmas and what they allow you to do in your lineup are going to be my preferred way to play my final classic slate of the season, your final classic slate of the 2024 UFL season. I will have projections for week 11 here, conference championship weekend in the UFL, available in the Occupy Fantasy Discord this evening after the St. Louis Battlehawks and San Antonio Brahmas release their final depth chart and inactives. I will also have projections for each of the single game showdown slates that you can play this weekend on Saturday and on Sunday. Those are available for free for Occupy Fantasy Discord subscribers. Costs just $3 a month to be a member of our Discord. You certainly don't want to miss out on that. We're talking about not just UFL, but basically every other sport known to mankind. And Pick 6, which I would have loved to talk about tonight. Alas, that'll have to wait for another sport and another time. I will be back next week to talk about the best plays for the UFL Championship and the big showdown contest everyone has been winning tickets for all season long. Looking forward to that. And we may actually even have a few surprises for you guys over on OccupyFantasy.com for that game when we get there. But for now, good luck in week 11, and I'll be back next week to talk to you about week 12 in the UFL.